RT is challenging CNN journalist Christiane Amanpour to travel to the Syrian city of Aleppo with one of our crews to interview Omran Dagnish. He's the little boy you'll remember who came to symbolise the country's suffering last August after photos emerged of him sitting ashen-faced and shell-shocked in the back of an ambulance. Our editor-in-chief, Margarita Simonian, threw down the gauntlet after RT exposed how his story had been misrepresented by many outlets. The Russian Foreign Ministry's spokesperson also said earlier that she believes the CNN correspondent was guilty of using Omran's story to manipulate public opinion. Let's cross live to RT's Ilya Petrenko for more on that side of the story. Ilya, tell us why this boy's stories come in the spotlight again.
Colin, hi. Well, this is the case when one heartbreaking image, one touching human story, sadly becomes this massive tool for demonizing what Russia was doing in Syria. Now, last year, during what's known as the siege of eastern Aleppo, when Syrian government forces backed by Moscow were trying to kick Nusra and affiliated terrorist groups out of Syria's biggest city, we remember that it seemed that all that some news organizations had to do was put up Omran's photo to start going about for hours how Russia was targeting civilians in Syria without going into much detail, without explaining what exactly was happening, why this was being done, and very often without having reporters on the ground. I'm not saying that the suffering of civilians in Syria is something that journalists should ignore, but really turning this poor individual into this spearhead of a propaganda campaign. You remember perhaps that showing Omran's photo to Sergei Lavrov was one of the highlights of CNN's Christiane Amanpour interview with Sergei Lavrov. Now that we've spoken to Omran's father and heard his thoughts about what exactly happened last August, the Russian Foreign Ministry had some very critical things to say about the Western media coverage. We're going to listen to that just in a sec, but first, let's go back to some of the words by Christiane Amanpour.
Omran Dagnish, he's 5 years old. That is a war crime, sir.
The boy was really wounded, but all the situation surrounding him was completely distorted by the alleged human rights activists and journalists, including Amanpour. She bluntly manipulated public opinion. If she started this story, and she even wasn't idle to come to Moscow and show the picture to Lavrov, maybe she'll have enough courage and journalist ethics and conscience to end it, to go to Aleppo and find the boy's family and make an honest interview.
Just to remind you, Omran Dagnish was caught up in the Syrian civil war. He appeared to have survived, survived what appeared to be an airstrike. And when we spoke to Omran's father, he told us that the White Helmets group, who portray themselves as a brigade of rescuers, first aid responders, they were busy filming and taking photos of the boy instead of giving him first aid, and also they ignored requests by Omran's father to examine the site of the strike and the rubble. Here's more of what Mohammed told us.
I didn't ask for anything with regard to Omran. No media, no fame, nothing. They photographed him without my consent. I brought him back here so that no one would exploit him. I shaved his head. I even changed his name. I prevented him from going out in the street. So we came here and settled, and it was good. There was no disturbance at all. And then he was back in the media. They talk about him, the person who photographed him. They talk about him as if he is theirs. This is my son. All I want is for them to leave him alone.
Just another thing, these images were filmed by us in Aleppo, where the family continues to live, and now it is government-held Aleppo. So that is something for you to think about as well.
Okay, Ilya Petrenko in central Moscow, thanks very much for that update. Thanks a lot.